The start of a new century, commencing in the year 1500, marked a transformative period in European history. Magic and fantasy ruled over the land as the newly invented printing press dispersed stories of distant discoveries and romantic tales of heroes and knights. In the Italian peninsula, the Renaissance flourished, with artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo creating the masterpieces studied in art history classes today. In England, the Wars of the Roses were now a part of history, as the House of Tudor under Henry VII reigned over the Isles and brought much-needed stability to the region. France was finally at peace, as the seemingly endless 100 Years' War with England had finally come to an end, and began to thrive under a new young king, Francis I. In Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire under the aging Maximilian hoped to find some much-needed energy, as the Byzantine Empire had surrendered to the Ottoman advance, and now the Ottomans were knocking on the door of the Christian kingdoms of Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, on the Iberian Peninsula, the Portuguese had discovered a sea route to Asia by navigating around Africa, and Spain had a hell of an end to the 1400s. At the dawn of the century, there was no unified Spain, but the separate kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, Navarra, and the Emirate of Granada. The marriage of Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Fernand II of Aragon united their kingdoms and dramatically altered the course of Spanish history. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs funded some guy named Christopher to sail across the unfamiliar Atlantic, leading to the discovery of a whole new continent. That same year, they completed the Reconquista by conquering Granada, the last Islamic kingdom in Spain, and further enforced religious uniformity by expelling the Jews. However, our story begins in the Habsburg territories of the Netherlands, where rapid urban growth and trade elevated its significance on the European stage. And pondering around the luxurious Dutch countrysides were Joanna, the daughter of the Catholic monarchs, and Philip the Handsome, the son of Maximilian I and Mary of Burgundy. Joanna and Philip's union emerged from a unique series of births, marriages, and deaths that united the territory of 4 European dynasties under one rule. Although luck played a huge role in Charles V becoming the most powerful monarch since the Roman Empire, the Habsburg rulers strategically married to add territories and strengthen bonds inside and outside their dynasty, giving rise to a slogan that first became popular after 1477.
Others make war. You, happy Habsburgs, marry. For the kingdoms Mars gives to others, Venus gives to you.
On February 24th, 1500, also recognized as St. Matthew's Day, Joanna was attending a ball at a palace in Ghent, when the future emperor made his eager arrival into the world. The celebrations of the birth of Charles were fitting for his potential, as around the Netherlands, people praised and cheered for the arrival of a promising prince. Although Philip's sister, Margaret of Austria, who would later become Charles's guardian, suggested naming him Maximilian, fire name by the way, Philip decided to name his son after his grandfather, Charles the Bold of Burgundy. When Charles turned 1 year old, his father appointed him as Knight of the Order of the Golden Fleece. With this, he also granted Charles the honorific title of Duke of Luxembourg. Now, Charles, at the moment of his birth, wasn't supposed to inherit more than the Dutch Habsburg states. But a series of unfortunate events, or fortunate as this video is about Charles, the stars were aligned to allow him to inherit vast amounts of land. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella's only son, John, died in 1497, and so did his child shortly after birth. This left their daughter Isabella as heir, but she died too in 1498 after giving birth to a son who died 2 years later. Therefore, Charles's parents Philip and Joanne became the inheritors to the recently united Spanish throne. Although this meant that Charles was to eventually become the King of Spain, this also meant that for a significant portion of his childhood he felt abandoned by his parents, who had to depart to Spain to claim and protect their throne. Consequently, Charles grew up largely under the care of others, with Margaret of Austria, Charles's aunt, appointed as his caretaker. Charles and his sister warmed up to Margaret, viewing her as a mother figure as she provided them with much-needed guidance, education, and affection. After the unfortunate death of Philip the Handsome, 2 months after taking control of Castile, Margaret of Austria organized a grand ceremony for her young nephew, where he was, for the first time, officially glorified as the ruler of the Netherlands and introduced into the political arena. Yet, Charles was still a kid, who, although struggled with his education, particularly in literacy, enjoyed a playful childhood in the Netherlands. Charles and his sister engaged in activities such as fencing, riding hobby horses, and later actually riding horses, listening to music, dancing, painting, and hunting. His grandfather, Emperor Maximilian, told Margaret of Austria in 1510,
"We are delighted that our grandson Charles takes so much pleasure in hunting, because otherwise one might think he was a bastard."
Due to his father's premature death, Maximilian became Charles's main role model, passing on to him ideas and habits such as foreign policy goals and humanism. Maximilian achieved this by appointing Charles' first confessor, Adrian of Utrecht, who showed the young prince tough love while teaching him moral instruction and practical advice for governance. Adrian ensured that Charles' poor Latin skills did not deprive him of learning essential culture by providing him French translations of classical works by Aristotle and Livy. This teacher-student connection was quite unique, as the student would become emperor and defender of Christianity, and the teacher would become the pope. Thus, both attempted to defend and promote Christianity throughout their successful careers. Yet, despite Charles attaining a well-structured education, there were some significant gaps. Historian Geoffrey Parker describes him as a high school dropout, noting that his formal education ended when he was 15 after his mentor, Adrian of Utrecht, left for Spain as a special envoy. One notable gap in his education was that Charles never learned the language of his future kingdom and his mother's home country, Spain. Back in the Iberian Peninsula, everything was quite unstable. The death of his father Philip had driven his mother Joanna to madness, as she would refuse to leave Philip's dead body. Meanwhile, the governor in control, the power-hungry and controversial Cardinal Cisneros, faced open opposition from some nobles and cities due to his unconventional policies. Ferdinand of Aragon took the reins and locked up Charles's mother, who, after this event, would be known as Joanna the Crazy. It wasn't until the death of his grandfather Ferdinand that Charles was forced to leave his comfortable native Netherlands to be coronated in Spain. He began to secure his Dutch territories and prepare for his long journey. He signed treaties with England and France, arranged a government in the Netherlands, and assembled a large household for the trip, which included his sister Eleanor. However, this trip would be delayed, as it required funds and favorable winds to commence the journey. Charles waited through June, July, August, and finally, on September 8th, Charles had an emotional departure and embarked on his journey to the peninsula. The trip, although still dangerous as storms, fire, or even pirates could complicate things at any time, had a festive feel, as his boat was full of food, youth, and energy. On the ships, soldiers, sailors, courtiers, and the king's horses joined Charles on the seas. But on the very first night, tragedy struck. The king got a bad case of seasickness, and to top it off, the ship carrying Charles's favorite horses and 160 passengers caught on fire and sank. According to the trip's chronicler, this didn't worry Charles, as the boat carried the least amount of valuable and notable people. After this event, the journey was smooth and Charles arrived in 13 days. But instead of landing where they expected them in Santander, they landed on the coast of Asturias, where locals approached them with swords and spears as they believed that such a large landing must have been an invasion. As soon as the misunderstanding was solved, the king and his group enjoyed omelets and pancakes made with local eggs and flour. The king had arrived at his lands, lacking the language and culture, with a mother deemed crazy, yet still perceived as the rightful ruler, with upset locals who rather inclined towards his younger Spanish-born brother Ferdinand, lacking the necessary resources for a comfortable journey to the angry courts of Castile, as Charles intended to allocate the most lucrative positions to his Dutch partners. But we'll see all of that in episode 2. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.